Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses as we conclude with Part 3, The Sacred Fire in the Spine and Brain, from Melchizedek and the Mystery of Fire, a treatise in 3 parts by Manly P. Hall. Part 3, The Sacred Fire in the Spine and Brain. Santi called the medulla spinalis, spinal cord, the central axis of the nervous system. In a person of average size, the spinal cord is about 18 inches in length, weighs approximately 1 ounce, and terminates opposite the first lumbar vertebra. The upper end of the spinal cord, passing upward through the foramen magnum, the large opening in the occipital bone of the skull, ends at the medulla oblongata. Running through the spinal cord is a tiny central channel referred to as the 6th ventricle. This is described as follows. It is just visible to the naked eye, but it extends throughout the cord and expands above the 4th ventricle. In the conus medullaris, it is also dilated, forming the ventriculus terminalis et Krausi. According to the Eastern system of occult culture, there are 49 sacred nerve centers in the human body, of which the 7 most important and key centers are placed near the spine at various intervals. The total number, 49, is the square of 7 and is also the number of rounds and sub-rounds of a planetary chain. When seen clairvoyantly, all of these centers resemble flowers or electric sparks. Each one of the 7 main plexuses has 6 of lesser importance surrounding it, thus forming 6 pointed stars diagrammatically, although the centers are not arranged in star-like order in the body. Concerning the continued recurrence of the sacred number 7 in connection with the organs and parts of the human body, H.P. Blavatsky writes, "Remember that physiology, imperfect as it is, shows septenary groups all over the exterior and interior of the body. The 7 orifices, the 7 organs at the base of the brain, the 7 plexuses, the pharyngeal, the laryngeal, cavernous, cardiac, epigastric, some as solar plexus, prostatic, and sacral plexus, etc. These 7 are the negative spinal plexuses of first importance, but disciples of the mysteries are warned not to attempt the development of these centers because they are negative poles. All of the real plexuses which the true disciple of the highest knowledge should try to unfold are located within the skull, for the body is a negative pole of that spiritual body contained within the cranial cavity. As the body is controlled by the brain, the true adept works with the brain, avoiding the negative poles of the brain centers which are located along the spine. Proper development of the 7 brain discs, or spiritual interpenetrating globes, results in the awakening of the spinal flowers by an indirect process. Beware of the direct process by concentrating upon or directionalizing the internal breath towards the spinal centers. Madame Blavatsky might have added to her list of septenaries the 7 sacred organs about the heart, the 7 ductless glands of first importance, the 7 methods by which the body is vitalized, the 7 sacred breaths, the 7 body systems, bones, nerves, arteries, muscles, etc., the 7 layers of the auric egg, the 7 major divisions of the embryo, the 7 senses, 5 awakened and 2 latent, and the 7-year periods into which human life is divided. All of these are reminders of the fact that 7 primitive and primary spirits have become incarnated in the composite structure of man, and that the Elohim are actually within his own nature, where from their 7 thrones they are molding him into a septenary creature. One of these Elohim, which corresponds to a color, a musical note, a planetary vibration, and a mystical dimension, is the key consciousness of every kingdom in nature. The Elohim also take turns in controlling the life of the human being. According to the ancient Brahmins, the lord of the human race is keyed to the musical note Fa, and his vibration runs through the minute tube in the spinal column. This tube is called the Sushumna. The essence moving through the Sushumna finally blossoms outward, forming a magnificent flower in the brain. This is called Sahasrara, the 1,000-petaled lotus, in the midst of which is enthroned the divine eye of the gods. In India, it is possible to secure inexpensive chromos showing a meditating yogi with these flower centers along the spine, connected together by the 3 nagas, or serpent gods, which represent the divisions of the spinal cord. The caduceus of Hermes shows the 2 serpents wound around the central staff, where they vibrate as the sharp and flat notes of the central stem. The Naga gods, or serpents, often symbolized with human heads, sometimes as cobras with 7 heads, are favorite motifs in Oriental art. In an isolated part of the jungle in Indochina stand the remains of the ancient city of Angkor, concerning the building of which nothing is known, although the natives maintain that its great structures were raised in a single night by the gods. These buildings contain hundreds of carvings of great serpents, most of them hooded cobras. In some cases, the bodies, being of great length, are used as railings around walls and the sides of steps. In the Indian chromos, the blossoms along the spine are often shown with varying numbers of petals. For example, the one at the base of the spine has but 4 petals, the next above 6. Each of these petals is inscribed with a mysterious Sanskrit character representing a letter of the ancient alphabet. The petals are believed to indicate the number of nerves branching from the plexus or ganglion. The lotus blossoms are often ornamented with the figures of the gods. For all of the deities of the Brahmin pantheon are related to nerve centers in the human body, and the proclivities which they demonstrate mythologically are symbolic of activities within the nature of man. One Oriental painting shows 3 sunbursts, one covering the head, in the midst of which sits Brahma with 4 heads, his body a dark, mysterious color. The second sunburst, which covers the heart, solar plexus, and upper abdominal region, shows Vishnu sitting in the blossom of the lotus on a couch formed of the coils of the serpent of cosmic motion, its 7 hooded head forming a canopy over the god. Over the generative system is a third sunburst, in the midst of which sits Shiva, his body a grayish-white, and the Ganges river flowing out of the crown of his head. This painting was the work of an Indian mystic who spent many years on the figures, subtly concealing therein great truths. The Christian legends could be related to the human body by the same method as the Oriental, for the meanings concealed in the teachings of both schools are identical. In Masonry, the 3 sunbursts represent the gates of the temple, at which Mirant is struck, there being no gate in the north because the sun never shines from the northern angle of the heavens. The north is the symbol of the physical because of its relation to ice, crystallized water, and to the body, crystallized spirit. In man, the light shines toward the north, but never from it, because the body has no light of its own. It shines with the reflected glory of the divine life particles concealed within the physical substances. For this reason, the moon is accepted as the symbol of man's physical nature, Hiram or Chiram, as he should more properly be called, inasmuch as his name consists of the letters which in Hebrew stand for fire, air, and water, represents the mysterious fiery, airy water which must be raised through the 3 grand centers symbolized by the ladder with 3 rungs, and the sunburst flowers mentioned in the description of the Indian painting. It must also pass upward by means of the ladder of 7 rungs, the 7 lotus blossoms first described. These blossoms need not be considered entirely from an Oriental angle. Christians could properly call them the stations of the cross, for they are sacred places where the redeeming fire stops for a moment on its way up Calvary to liberation. The spinal column is a chain of 33 segments divided into 5 groups. 1, the cervical or neck vertebrae, 7 in number. 2, the dorsal or thoracic vertebrae, of which there are 12, 1 for each rib. 3, the lumbar vertebrae, 5 in number. 4, the sacrum, 5 segments fused into 1 bone. And 5, the coccyx, 4 segments considered as 1. The 9 segments of the sacrum and coccyx are pierced by 10 foramina, through which pass the roots of the tree of life. 9 is the sacred number of man, and there is a great mystery concealed in the sacrum and coccyx. That part of the body from the kidneys downward was called by the early Kabbalists the land of Egypt, into which the children of Israel were taken during the captivity. Out of Egypt, Moses, the illuminated mind, as his name signifies, led the tribes of Israel, the 12 faculties, by raising the brazen serpent in the wilderness upon the symbol of the Tau cross. At the base of the spine, there is a tiny nerve center concerning which nothing is known. But the occultist realizes that the symbolism of the second crucifixion, which is supposed to have taken place in Egypt, has reference to the crossing of certain nerves at the base of the spine. A friend visiting Mexico was good enough to count the rattles on the tails of stone images of Quetzalcoatl, or Kulkulkan, as he is sometimes known. In nearly every case, they were 9 in number. The cosmic hierarchy controlling the constellation of Scorpio has control of the occult fires in the human body. To symbolize this, they were given the name of the serpent gods, and the priests initiated into their mystery wore the coiled serpent in the form of the uraeus upon their foreheads. These priests also often carried flexible staffs carved in the form of a snake and from 6 to 10 feet long. The wood of which they were made was specially treated by a process now lost. At a certain part of the ceremonial, the priests bent the flexible staffs into circles, placing the tail of the carved snake into its mouth, accompanying the process with secret invocations. The transcendentalists of the Middle Ages did the same thing, but not with the full understanding possessed by the ancient priests. The lords of Scorpio, being the great initiators, accepted none into the mysteries, save when the sun was in a certain degree of Taurus, symbolized by Apis, the bull. When the bull carried the sun between his horns, the neophytes were admitted. In geocentric astrology, this takes place when the sun is supposedly in the last decan of the constellation of Scorpio. This is true not only in the ancient Egyptian rituals, but it is still true in the mystery schools. Candidates for the occult path of fire are to this day admitted only when the sun is geocentrically in Scorpio and heliocentrically in Taurus. The star group constituting the constellation of the Scorpion closely resembles a spread eagle and is one of the reasons why that bird is sacred to Freemasonry, which is a fire cult. Although the 3 tubes of the spinal cord are called in the ancient wisdom the nagas, or whirling snakes, and the serpent which cannot die till sundown was accepted as their symbol, the scorpion has also been used as emblematic of the spinal fire. This scorpion was called Judas, the betrayer, for he is a backbiter, carrying his sting in the sacrum and coccyx. We are reminded of the legend of Parsifal, for the castle of Klingzor, the evil magician, located at the foot of the mountain in the midst of a garden of illusion, is merely a symbol of this city of Babylon and the land of darkness, where all too often the Son of God is tempted to sacrifice his immortality. Here also is the scene which Goethe called Walpurgis Night. It is here also that the false light is chained for 1,000 years, as related by Milton in Paradise Lost. Concerning the descent of the spirit of fire down the spine into the place of darkness, Milton says, "Him the almighty power hurled headlong, flaming from the ethereal sky with hideous ruin and combustion, down to bottomless perdition, there to dwell in adamantine chains and penal fire." It is also from here that the hordes of scorpions arose, spreading blight and destruction to all the earth, as is related in the book of Revelation. Here also is the rock Moriah, over the brow of which Hiram is buried. Here lurks Typhon the destroyer and Satan who was stoned. His is the dwelling place of the false light, to differentiate it from the true light which shines out through the regions of Shamayim above. Between these two lies the length of the spinal cord, a rope connecting the ark and the anchor. There is a legend among the Orientals to the effect that Kundalini, the goddess of the serpentine spinal fire, growing tired of heaven, decided to visit the new earth, which was being formed in the sea of space. She therefore climbed down a rope ladder, the umbilical cord, from heaven, and found an island, the fetus, in the Sea of Meru, the amniotic fluids, surrounded by the mountains of eternity, the Corian, all of which existed within the egg of Brahma, the womb of Matripadma. After exploring the island, Kundalini decided to return up the ladder once more, but as she was about to ascend, the ladder was cut from above, the umbilical cord severed at birth, and the island drifted off into space. In fear, Kundalini ran and hid herself in a cave, the sacral plexus, where, according to certain of the Eastern teachings, she remains coiled like the cobra in the snake charmer's basket, from which she can be lured only by the 3 mysterious notes of the charmer's flute. When Kundalini begins to unwind, she ascends as a serpentine stream of fire through the spinal canal and into the brain, where she stimulates the activity of the pituitary body. The spine may be divided horizontally into 3 sections. The lowest section includes the lumbar vertebrae, together with the segments forming the sacrum and coccyx, and is surrounded by a brick-red haze of a lurid and angry color. This haze is oily in texture and causes the sacrum and coccyx to appear the color of dried blood. The color, however, is living rather than dead. Higher up towards the lumbar vertebrae, the color is somewhat lighter and not so angry looking. It gradually turns to orange, and through the section composed of the 12 dorsal vertebrae, There is a golden glow radiating outward from a thread-like line of what appears to be a river of yellow fire. These colors extend somewhat outward along the nerves which branch oil from the spine between the vertebrae. A little higher, the yellow becomes flecked with green, and through the cervical section, the stream becomes faintly electric blue. Through the Ida and Pingala, two lateral tubes through the spinal cord, paralleling the central tube on either side, this stream of fire goes up and down incessantly. The farther up the fire goes, the thinner and less brilliant its hues, but the purer and more beautiful the colors, until finally they meet in a seething, molten mass in the pons of the medulla oblongata, where the fire begins almost immediately to permeate the third ventricle and agitate the pituitary body. This tiny form is described by Santee as follows. The hypophysis, pituitary body, is composed of two lobes bound together by connective tissue. A sheet of dura mater, diaphragma celli, holds them in the hypophyseal fossa. The anterior lobe, the larger, is derived from the epithelium of the mouth cavity, and in structure resembles the thyroid gland. Its closed vesicles, limed with columnar epithelium, in part ciliated, contain a viscid, jelly-like material, pituita, which suggested the old name for the body. The anterior lobe is hollowed out on its posterior surface, kidney shape, and receives the posterior lobe, the infundibulum, into the concavity. The hypophysis has an internal secretion which appears to stimulate the growth of connective tissues and to be essential to sexual development. The pituitary body is the negative pole, yet it plays many roles in the development of the spiritual consciousness. In one sense of the word, it is the initiator, for it raises the candidate, the pineal gland. Being of feminine polarity, the pituitary body lives up to its dignity by being the eternal temptress. In the Egyptian myths, Isis, who partakes of the nature of the pituitary body, conjures Ra, the supreme deity of the sun, who is here symbolic of the pineal gland, to disclose his sacred name, which he finally does. The physiologic process by means of which this is accomplished is worthy of detailed consideration. The pituitary body begins to glow very faintly, and little rippling rings of light pour out from around the gland and gradually fade out a short distance from the pituitary body. As occult growth continues, according to the proper understanding of the law of occultism, the emanating rings around the gland grow stronger. They are not equally distributed around the pituitary body. The circles are elongated on the side facing the third ventricle and reach out in graceful parabolas towards the pineal gland. Gradually, as the stream becomes more powerful, they approach ever closer to the slumbering eye of Shiva, tinting the form of the pineal gland with golden orange light and gently coaxing it into animation. Under the benign warmth and radiance of the pituitary fire, the divine egg thrills and moves, and the magnificent mystery of occult unfoldment takes place. The pineal gland is thus described by Santee. Pineal body, corpus pineal, is a cone-shaped body, 6 mm, 0.25 in, high and 4 mm, 0.17 in diameter, joined to the root of the third ventricle by a flattened stalk, the habenula. It is also called the epiphysis. The pineal body is situated in the floor of the transverse fissure of the cerebrum, directly below the splenium of the corpus callosum, and rests between the superior colliculi of the quadrigeminal bodies on the posterior surface of the midbrain. It is closely invested by pia mater. The habenula splits into a dorsal and ventral lamina, which are separated by the pineal recess. The ventral lamina fuses with the posterior commissure, but the dorsal stretches forward over the commissure in continuity with the roof epithelium. The border of the dorsal lamina is thickened along the line of attachment to the thalamus and forms the stria medullaris thalami, pineal stria. The thickening is due to the presence of bundle of fibers from the columna of the fornix and the intermediate stria of the olfactory tract. Between the medullary striae at the posterior end, there is a transverse band, the commissura habenularum, through which the fibers of the striae partially decussate to the nucleus habenulate in the thalamus. The interior of the pineal body is made up of closed follicles surrounded by ingrowths of connective tissue. The follicles are filled with epithelial cells mixed with calcareous matter, the brain sand, a servulus cerebri. Calcareous deposits are found also on the pineal stalk and along the chorioid plexuses. The function of the pineal body is unknown, Descartes facetiously suggests that it is the abode of the spirit, the sand, of man. In reptiles, there are two pineal bodies, an anterior and a posterior, of which the posterior remains undeveloped, but the anterior forms a rudimentary cyclopean eye. In the Hatteria, a New Zealand lizard, it projects through the parietal foramen and presents an imperfect lens and retina, and in its long stalk nerve fibers. The human pineal body is probably homologous with the posterior pineal body of reptiles. The pineal gland is a link between the consciousness of man and the invisible worlds of nature. Whenever the arc of the pituitary body contacts this gland, there are flashes of temporary clairvoyance. But the process of making these two work together consistently is one requiring not only years, but lives of consecration and special physiological and biological training. This third eye is the cyclopean eye of the ancients, for it was an organ of conscious vision long before the physical eyes were formed, although vision was a sense of cognition rather than sight in those ancient days. As man's contact with the physical world grew more complete, he lost his inner understanding together with the conscious connection with the creative hierarchies. In order to regain this connection, it is necessary for him to rise above the limitations of the physical world. He must not, however, sever his connection with humanity by becoming a recluse or an impractical dreamer. The occultist must not walk out of anything, he must work out of everything. In the pineal gland, there is a tiny grit or sand concerning which modern science knows practically nothing. Investigations have shown that this grit is absent in idiots and others lacking properly organized mentality. Occultists know that this grit is the key to the spiritual consciousness of man. It serves as a connecting link between consciousness and form. The foregoing will give brief understanding of part of the mystery of man's occult anatomy. Those with discerning eyes will see in the spinal canal leading upward into ventricles of the brain, through certain doors concerning which science is ignorant, the passageways and chambers of the ancient mysteries. They will realize that the spinal spirit fire is the candidate who is being initiated. In the triangular room of the third ventricle, the Master Mason's degree is given. Here the candidate is buried in the coffin, and here, after 3 days, he rises from the dead. The lower degrees of the ancient mysteries led through tortuous passageways where howling and crying rent the air, and the flames of the inferno flickered through the darkness. The neophyte, seeking for light, was first led through the underworld, where he fought strange beasts and heard the wailing of lost souls. All this was emblematic of man's own lower nature, through which his spiritual ideals must rise to illumination and truth. The higher degrees of the mysteries took place in beautiful domed buildings where white-robed priests chanted and sang, and lights from invisible lamps shone on golden jewels. The greater mysteries represented the felicity of the soul surrounded by light and truth. They symbolized that man had raised himself from the darkness of ignorance into the light of philosophy. Plato said that the body is the sarcophagus of the soul, for he realized that within the form was an immortal principle which could free itself from mortal sheath only by death or by initiation. By the ancients, these two were considered almost synonymous. For that reason, the dying Socrates ordered his disciples to make an offering at the time of his death, similar to the one which candidates made when about to be initiated into the Eleusinian mysteries. The mystery of the all-seeing eye was sometimes symbolized by the peacock, because this bird had eyes in all of its feathers. In honor of the sacred eye and the crown of the head, the monks of all nations shave their hair over the place which it is supposed to look out. Small children who have but recently completed their embryonic recapitulation of humanity's early struggle for life have an unduly sensitive area about the crown of the head. The skull does not close there immediately. In some cases it never closes, although usually the sutures unite between the 2nd and 5th years. The extreme sensitiveness over the area of the third eye is accompanied by a certain clairvoyance. The small child is still living largely in the invisible worlds. While its physical organism is unresponsive, it is conscious and active, at least to a limited degree, in those worlds with which it is connected by the open gateway of the pineal gland. Gradually, certain manifestations of his higher consciousness enter into its physical organism and crystallize into the fine grit found in that gland. There is no grit in the pineal gland until consciousness enters. Not only are the two glands in the head tremendously important, but the whole glandular system, especially the ductless glandular system, exercises tremendous sway over the human system. The white blood corpuscles are not actually manufactured in either the pancreas or the spleen, but are really formed by activity of the etheric double, which is connected to the physical form through the spleen. A continuous stream of partly etheric white blood corpuscles pours from the invisible world into the visible organism through the gateway of the spleen. The same is true of the liver, for the red blood corpuscles are to a certain degree a crystallization of astral forces, for the liver is the portal leading into the astral body. The 7 major ductless glands are under the control of the 7 planets, and each one of them is actually a 7-fold body in the same way that all the vital organs are 7-fold. The heart is divided into 7 complete organs by a certain process of occult anatomy, as is also the brain. The fact that the human brain closely resembles in certain details, especially the organs grouped about the base of it, an androgynous human embryo, is sufficient to cause further investigation. Sometime physicians will realize that the knowledge of the organs and functions of the human body is the most important and complete method of understanding the religions of all the world. For all religions, even the most primitive, are based on the functions of the human form. It was not without reason that the ancient priests placed over the temple gate the immortal motto, "Man, know thyself." Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.